do you want to pick up blue-black tempo, but you're unsure if it's good against your local meta, or maybe you want to pick up a new deck that's strong against blue-black tempo? Well, you've come to the right place. I've played over 500 matches with the deck against a lot of other decks, and I will tell you how good the matchups are and whether there's some specific tech you can use to improve one of those matchups. The first one is Affinity, also called 8-cast or Affinity Stompy or Patchwork Stompy, and this is usually an unfavored matchup. However, you can improve it with sideboarding. The reason it's unfavored is that they don't really have a single key card that you can force to win the matchup or Thoughtseize, because they have a lot of threats and every single one of those threats can kill you on its own. So I mean, Patchwork Automaton is maybe the weakest one. You can beat it, but this is just one in the long stream of threats, and it can play it for a single tap of a soul land, and with the wards it's difficult to handle, but they can really go tall with Kappa Cannoneer. Ward 4 is really difficult to kill. Often it's unblockable, so Barrowgolf often doesn't help. Then Childred's Edict is one of the few cards that works, but even that, I mean, sometimes they have a lot of other creatures. So Pinnacle Emissary means that now instead of only going tall, they can also go wide. So the old 8-cast, where they played a lot of cast effects to draw cards, it could somewhat be kept in check with Orcish Bowmasters, but now they play less of the Thoughtcast spells and more stuff like Memory Guardian to just clog the board and overrun you. And the turn 1 Pinnacle Emissary can be really strong with all the baubles. I mean, you have some counterplay with Tamio, but still it's really difficult, and they can also grind you out with Emry. You can somewhat grind back with Tamio, but you need 2 mana to crack Clue, and Emry, they don't need to pay that, and yeah, it's often castable for a single blue mana. Then they also have Urza Saga, so you have to deal with the tokens as well. And sometimes they even play Chalice of the Void, and in closed decklist tournaments, really difficult to know if they have it or not if you don't see it. So if they have Chalice, you want Force of Negation after sideboarding, but otherwise Force of Negation is often bad, and it's also really hard to find the correct slots, because you want removal like Fatal Push against Emry, but otherwise Fatal Push, for example, bad against a lot of tokens, often not good against Kappa Cannoneer. So yeah, sideboarding is kind of a challenge. They are a bit low on removal, and you can somewhat improve the matchup if you have mass artifact removal. Unfortunately, we don't have red, so we cannot play Meltdown. So usually what we do is something like Nilrod, but Nilrod can be even too slow if they create a lot of tokens or have a Kappa Cannoneer or something. But I would say some combination of Nilrod and Engineered Explosives can help. However, then there's even kind of a non-bow. So if you play Nilrod and then later you find Engineered Explosives. So if we could even think about something like Powder Keg, because that kills artifact lands, but Powder Keg is not really a realistic option in most metas because it's bad against most other decks. And if you have Toxic Deluge, can help as well. But yeah, in general, I would say it's unfavored, but you can improve it somewhat. I would probably play 2 Engineered Explosives if you have lots of 8-cast or Affinity in your local meta, and think about picking up Nilrod as well if you have some cross-hate, right? If your meta is Affinity and also Storm and Mystic Forge, then I think Nilrods are quite useful. Speaking of Storm, there's a lot of different Storm variants, but I think in general they are slightly unfavored, because usually in the current meta we don't have Nilrods in our sideboard, but like we can improve it. And you may now think, well, Conrad, why do you think that Storm is a bad matchup? You are a tempo deck with Thoughtseize and with Daze and with Force of Will, and we have Tamio to recur the Thoughtseize and the Force of Will again, and we have a clock, and so on and so on. So isn't this a nightmare matchup? Well, not really, because like they often don't care about days, because they usually have lots of mana, and also like they often are tuned against tempo with stuff like Veil of Summer, or maybe it's like Black Saga Storm, or they have Galvanic Relay, so they often have some options to grind through. And sure, you have a clock with your Nether Golfs if you play them, or you go for a quick time your ultimate. But usually going for the ultimate isn't really great because it's at the earliest turn 5, and usually they can kill you before that, so it's probably better to just down tick Tamio to get that interaction back. But yeah, it depends on the variant. So for example, I would say the classical Ad Nauseam Tendrils is slightly favored. Many people don't play it right now because they need a lot of moving pieces, right? They need a lot of rituals to make Past in Flames good. So I would say this is slightly favored. I mean, they don't really care that much about Nilrod if they play Cabal Ritual and so on. But also your Hydroblasts are good against Past in Flames, but almost no one really plays classical Arndt anymore. But yeah, there's quite some variation in those Storm decks. So I would say you are very favored against High Tide, even though like structurally we would think, well, High Tide is good at going long, right? It can go off turn 3, but it can also go off turn 4 or turn 5. But turn 3 is without protection most of the times, and even though they can often pay for days, even if they do, that means in the early turns, then they don't have enough mana to do stuff like Turnabout, Time Spiral, and so on. And Orcish Bowmaster is also really, really strong against them. So I would say High Tide's unfortunately not really great right now with lots of blue-black tempo in the meta. So here with the Lion's Eye Diamond, I mean stuff like Black Saga, Storm, and TES, and like most other Storm variants. And yeah, but they are quite artifact heavy. So if you have lots of Storm and maybe something else like before mentioned Affinity, you can somewhat improve it with like Hate Permanence. But I think Hate Permanence in general are the best answer to most Storm decks. And I mean, we don't play Chalice, Trinisphere, stuff like this in our tempo deck. And I think the Storm decks are usually constructed in a way where they can fight through a bit of discard and counter magic. So if you have Nilrods in your sideboard, I think it is like kind of even. If you have like 2 Nilrods or slightly unfavored, if you don't have Nilrods or Dampening Spheres. So with a current responsible sideboarding, as long as Storm is like 5% or lower, I think it's unfavored, or let's say slightly unfavored. And I think Ruby Storm is also slightly unfavored because so it's not that strong in a vacuum, right? They don't have the super strong cards like Besiege the Mirror and Tugea's Will and so on. But on the other hand, they care less about Nilrod, so they are less acceptable to certain hate cards. And speaking of like Storm, they also often play Echo of Eon, so maybe we show some variations here on Goldfish. So the new Runehorn Hellkite can be a massive problem because even if you stock up your hand and you have lots of counter magic like Consign to Memory, a Force of Will, Force of Negation, well, you need to really play around Runehorn Hellkite and maybe Force of Will, a Lotus Petal or something if they have 6 mana available and the Runehorn Hellkite, or if they have like 5 mana available and the Runehorn Hellkite in the graveyard. Even if you sword seize your opponent, or if you have watched this game where I Hymn to Turak, I think my opponent, and they discarded Runehorn Hellkite. So this is what gives me nightmares about Storm, is always, I just called it the dragon, because you are not really equipped to handle it most of the time. Gea's Will is strong. I mean, you can bring in surgical extractions and so on, but usually you don't really have the space post sideboarding. So if you have something like Doughty Voidwalker is quite nice against Gea's Will. Then if you have, if they are heavy on the red splash, you can bring in 1 or 2 Hydroblasts, but it's really difficult to sideboard also because you often don't know how red heavy they are. There's so many variations. Echo of Eons also is often a problem because for example, if you have surgical extraction and you decide to board them in, it's often possible that you cannot apply it because if they go for Lion's Eye Diamond and sacrifice Lion's Eye Diamond and just cast Echo of Eons immediately, you don't get priority, so you never have a chance to use that surgical extraction. Then Veil of Summer, really, really strong. And yeah, Ad Nauseam is probably not that great against you. And Song of Creation is also quite strong. I mean, you have Orcish Bowmasters, which on the surface sounds really strong against Song of Creation, but the thing is that they often draw into Veil of Summer at some point, right? And then they cannot be targeted with Song of Creation, with Bowmaster anymore. And Urza Saga, they often play as well. And then, yeah, you have to be really careful to handle this as well. So against those Storm decks, I think Nilrod is probably the best hate card if you want to make the match up better. Doughty Voidwalker is also not bad. I mean, you need 2 black mana, and if you daze, then it can take a while. But still, it's a threat that also stops some of their win conditions. Empty the Warrens, I'm not as scared against because of Tamio, and yeah, Galvanic Relay is also quite strong against us because we cannot win quickly, and we usually don't play stuff that like Dampening Sphere. Alright, so that's my rating on the different Storm variations. So as we are discussing combo decks, maybe we talk about some more combo decks. So Oops All Spells, I think, is a good matchup for us because we have Thoughtseize, we have Daze and Force of Will, and post-board we even get surgical extractions. Maybe we have a Nilrod, which is nice against like the stuff like a Charbelcher Juke or Lotus Petals or what have you. So I really, really liked this matchup back when I had main board Nihil Spellbombs. Now maybe could put it here as well. Say, well, it depends on sideboard, but for now I want to put it here in the favorite part. And the also Necro Dominance combo is really an all-in combo deck where if you just force a key spell, then it's really, really strong, and often they cannot go again. And let's see what more combo decks do we have that are really all-in. I think most of the other combo decks, they have like can go multiple times or they have more protection. So I think this for now are all the ones that are really, really favored. So Reanimator, there is less tempo Reanimator right now, so I'm not really sure. There's also Turbo Reanimator and they can juke. So I think Reanimator, because we don't have Nihil Spellbomb in the main right now, maybe I would put it in slightly favored right now, but I'm not quite sure, right? Because of Force, Days, Wasteland and so on is quite good against them. Let's put them here in slightly favored. Then we have Sneak and Show. I would say this is probably favored. I mean, they do have the new land where they make their stuff uncounterable, but Hydroblast is nice after boarding. Our Bowmasters are nice to punish them for cantripping too much. But I mean, they also have them. They also have Force of Wills, and maybe they have something like, is it called Yggdrasil? I don't know, the artifact. And I mean, they have 2 different win conditions, right? Show and tell and sneak attack. So maybe I put them here on slightly favored right now. And Omni Show, maybe it's kind of even because they have often have Veil of Summer and Carpet of Flowers and stock up. So they're really, really made to grind through our stuff. Sometimes they could even splash for Uro. I think this is rare, but I think for now I would say it's definitely, Sneak and Show is easier to handle than Omni Show. Then what other combo decks do we have? I think Infect is also favored because we can kill the creatures. I mean, they may have Legolas quick reflexes, but other than that, we can kill many of the creatures with Orcish Bowmasters or block with Nethergolf or Orcish Bowmasters. So I think this is a good matchup in general. Then Elves, it's kind of, not many people play Elves nowadays. I would say it's slightly favored and depends on the sideboard, right? If you have two Toxic Deluges in the sideboard, then it's a really good matchup. If you have like no sweepers or single engineered explosives, then I would say it's slightly favored because they can also grind you out really well. They have Allosaurus Shepherd to make everything uncounterable. However, Glimpse of Nature is really, really weak. So here with elves, I mean the classical like Glimpse elves. So Orcish Bowmasters is really strong here. However, after sideboarding, they may sideboard out of Glimpse of Nature, and sometimes they have really strong starts with Allosaurus Shepherd, making everything uncounterable into, like for example, Natural Order uncounterable into Atraxa, and they also have some grindy combinations. For example, they can save their lands from Wasteland or return their elves with Witherbloom Symbiote, so they can kind of grind quite well, but I think we're still slightly favored because you have Orcish Bowmasters and Fatal Push, and like you can also counter key spells, and then they are often left with just a few useless 1/1s. So I would say it's slightly favored. All right, what more combo decks do we have? So I think the Cephalid Breakfast deck was even or slightly unfavored with Nadu, but now with Nadu banned, I think because we have Orcish Bowmaster, I would say it's slightly favored. I mean, I haven't played against it much after the banning, so this is a bit unsure. This could also be favored, but I think there are some combinations or some ways to play this deck where they can play quite well against tempo. So I played it a lot. I think it was in 2023, and at that point I felt like they were usually unfavored against tempo, but I was quite experienced with the deck at the time, and the tempo players weren't really experienced with playing against it. So I felt this often allowed me to get something done with like Stoneforge Mystic, or if you just play Teferi and just uptick it. So because you often think, well, Teferi dies to Orcish Bowmasters if you downtick, even if you just bounce the token, then you get finished by the Bowmasters, and then if you bounce the Bowmasters, they can just attack it down. But if you just uptick Teferi, pass the turn, and next turn combo off, and they don't have Fairy Macabre, then can it be quite strong. So I still would say slightly favored now that Bowmasters exist for a long time and Nadu is gone. I think the deck is a bit weak to us right now. Then we have Mystic Forge, and I have no idea why people stopped playing this deck. So I felt this was like slightly favored with good sideboarding in 2024 when I went to Eternal Weekend with Blue-Black Tempo and 2 Nilrods in the sideboard. I beat up the deck a lot and ended up with, I think, I don't know, I don't know, I had a really good score and finished in the money, mostly because I just had 2 Nilrods, and the 2 Nilrods did a lot of the heavy lifting. But right now, because of the new Planeswalker, I think they can grind through Nilrods. Even if you have Nilrods, they can still win often. And so I would say it's probably unfavored because they have just this long stream of threats. Like they play the One Ring and you counter it, and they go for another One Ring, you counter it again. And if you just don't, like if you don't have turn 1 Tamio, turn 2 Tamio flip with a lot of consign to memories, I think you lose most of the games. So yeah, but we could also put it here, but I think I'm going to put it in unfavored as well. And I don't know if we classify Cloud Post as combo. It's probably more ramp, but this is also unfavored, especially as it's not really sensible to put Harbinger of the Souls in the sideboard, since the rules change where it doesn't help. So we could also say, well, theoretically, if we put 4 Harbingers in the sideboard, maybe it's beatable, but realistically, I think we should put it under unfavored here. Do we find more combo decks. There's Dredge, which I think is unfavored. We could theoretically improve it. So I'm going to assume a usual like meta standard sideboard right now with, for example, 2 surgical extractions. So I would say in this case it's unfavored. But if you have lots of Dredge in your meta and maybe also Oops, and you put like 3 or 4 anti-sideboard cards in, and this is stuff that's good against Dredge. Like, I'm not even that sure what's good against Dredge. Lion of the Void probably, or Doughty Voidwalkers, but Doughty Voidwalkers could be even too slow. But yeah, I think if you really overload on the Graveyard, you can improve it. But I lost to it to Marfus Van Gogh in some Echo Cup, even with 2 Nihil spell bombs in the main. I think this is a combo deck that can grind through really well. It's maybe somewhat weak to a really quick combo, but we don't have that. So I would say this is unfavored. All right, let's look at Living End. So this is really rarely. I played against it only once in a while, but it's more of a modern deck, but it exists in Legacy sometimes rarely too. So the idea is that you have stuff like Shardlet's Agent and Violent Outburst for 3 mana, and then you cascade into Living End, and before that you cycle a bunch of big creatures, for example like Generous End or Oliphant. And when this goes off, you lose as Blue-Black Tempo because you are not equipped to handle a big board of 5/5s and 5/7s with reach and so on. And they usually, if they have the Violent Outburst, they usually play it on your turn. So they have 4 Force of Wills and 2 Force of Negations. And after boarding also Mystical Dispute. So this sounds quite strong. However, because you have the usual days, Swordseize, Force of Will, and after sideboarding, Force of Negation probably doesn't do much, right? Because they play the Outburst on your turn and the Shardlet's Agent. But I mean, you can still use Force of Negations if they use Shardlet's Agent on the Living End on Cascade. And also, I think in general, the Cascade decks are really, really weak right now because Consign to Memory exists. So assuming like a standard sideboard with like 2 to 4 Consign to Memories, I would say this is probably not a good matchup. However, it's also, it's a good matchup for us, but I also wouldn't put it as like an easy auto win because, right, they can fight back. They have the Force of Wills, the Force of Negations. If the game goes long enough, maybe you can just go for a replicated Consign. This sounds really strong. So I would, for now, categorize it as slightly favored for you. However, speaking of Cascade, I think the Cascade Crash deck is definitely favored because in addition to all the hoops they have to jump through in like Living End does, even if they get through all of your Consign to Memories and your Force of Negations and your Fatal Push, then all they get for the trouble is a pair of 4/4 Rhino tokens. And even if you have a version without main deck Barrowgolfs, like let's say you play Nethergolfs, they're really good at blocking Rhinos because very often you have like a 4/5 Nethergolf if you have Baubles, or if you don't play Nethergolfs but instead you play Baleful's Tricks, you can block them really well, or you can use Bowmaster tokens. I mean, Bowmaster in general is not really great against the Cascade Crash deck, but at least you can jump for a while and you can just stabilize exceptionally well with Barrowgolfs. And even if they have like 4/4 tokens, then still like one single Barrowgolf, if it resolves, is just so strong. So I would say Cascade Crash is definitely easier to beat than Oops All Spells. Maybe I'm not sure about compared to Hightide. Yeah, I think because at least like Necro Dominance can just kill you on the spot, and so maybe I'm not sure. I think it's probably of all those decks the easiest to beat. I mean, sure, they can have Force of Will and grab early for force, and maybe you can't beat it, but maybe you bring in something like engineered explosives or something, and they also cannot switch to the one where they reanimate a creature out of your deck because you don't have really that big creatures except Barrowgolfs or so. So I would say Cascade Crash is probably the deck you should not play right now in 2026 if you want to pick up a deck that is somewhat competitive, especially with lots of blue-black tempo in the meta. Another classical combo deck is Doomsday. So I would say in general, if it's Turbo Doomsday with the personal tutor and just lots of fast mana and Doomsday and cyclers, then I would say this is slightly favored because I mean, they can have those turn 1 starts where they are on the play with Days of Force backup and they just go for turn 1 Doomsday, and it's almost impossible to beat for your deck if they just put Cyclers and Cavern and Oracle in their deck, because in their pile, then it's really, really hard to raise them. However, post-board you have Consigned to Memory. However, I think I will put this more into the even category because most Doomsday decks right now are built in more of a hybrid fashion, more of tempo Doomsday, where they have Tamio in the main and maybe a few Murktides, and sideboard there are a few Barrowgolfs, and this makes it really, really difficult to sideboard. So often it's not even a good idea to put in Consigned to Memory or Force of Negation, because game 2 most often they switch out of the combo for just a lot of creatures, and then you can be stuck in hand with your 2 consigns against a couple of Barrowgolfs. However, it's also not unfavored because you have Fatal Push, which is really super strong. So you do have super strong answers for everything they do. You have to consign against the Doomsday and you have to push against the Barrowgolf. The problem is just they can always decide how they sideboard and you don't really know, especially for game 3. So all in all, I think I'm going to put it on even, but yeah, you can chime in. Maybe you say it's slightly favored, but yeah, for me, also most of the Doomsday players are really, really expert level. So maybe against a bad Doomsday player, maybe it's slightly favored, but against someone who's really, really an expert in Doomsday and has like a lot of jukes and you don't know if they bring in Barrowgolf or not against your push, or you don't know how you should sideboard. Maybe they even change between game 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. I would say it's more of an even matchup. Okay, after the combo decks, let's maybe talk about the control decks. So it's quite difficult to find the right symbols here. So I think let's use here Leyline Binding for the white-based Beanstalk decks, and I think they are really strong against us. And they probably have a few Carpet of Flowers in the sideboard to invalidate our Days and our Wasteland angle. I mean, if they are like 5 colors, maybe you can do something with Wasteland, and you do have Tamio and Kaito. So it's not like super unfavored, but in general, like they are banned versions and hot banned and real 4 color and 5 color, but in general I would say it's unfavored, and it's also hard to find good sideboard cards against them. I mean, we usually have the Bowmasters mainboard, which are already very good. But yeah, it's just structurally quite unfavored. So there's also the, let's say, the non-Beanstalk control decks are bad. Then I think we don't have an icon here for, do we have something for Jeskai? Yes, Jeskai is also really strong. I mean, their creatures are quite weak and we can use Hydroblasts. So if we get an early time, you're going maybe Jeskai is doable. I'm not quite sure, but let's put it here. It feels like it's not really super unfavored. What about Bug Beanstalk? I think Bug Beanstalk feels slightly even because I think without white and without Leyline Binding, I think it's quite hard sometimes for them to get rid of Tamio, and to get rid of Kaito especially is quite good. And also they have a weaker mana base, so many of the cards are like our own cards, but they have like less Bowmasters, less Tamios, and I mean, they have Murktides and so on, and usually they also only play one carpet in the sideboard, where I'm always wondering, why do you not play more? But maybe they also need enough stuff to like handle all the other control and combo decks. So I would say there may, in my experience, I think I have a positive win rate against Bug Beans, but then I also have like a 60% win rate in general, but I think against Bug Beans also similar. So what else do we have? We can also, like Stoneforge Mystic decks, there are also some degree of control, right? Jeskai is also with a lot of creatures. It also makes it difficult to handle. Let's put them all in unfavored now, I think, all the control decks, because it's really hard to tech against them. Like, it's also really hard often to find out, like, is it a 3-color one? Is it hot band? Is it really 4-color with a lot of red? Like, is it worth to bring in the Hydroblast? Do they have failure? Often you don't really know after game 1 if you have a quick win or something. And do you need Fatal Push? Do you need Daze? Probably Daze not, but do you need Force of Negation? And yeah, sometimes they play lots of basics in many of the variations, and now we don't have Harbingers, so I think I put them in unfavored, even if we can somewhat fight back with Tamio, Bowmaster, and Kaito. I still want to put them in unfavored for now, and I think that's all of the real control decks. I mean, there's Cradle Control, but I'm not counting this as a control deck right now. All right, so let's talk about the tempo decks now. So blue-black tempo, of course, is even, so we don't have it. I think the easiest to beat are the old variations without Cutter, that for that reason almost no one plays. So Questing, Druid, Rug Delver, even though I really love the deck, I think it's really cool card. So maybe in case Tamio gets banned, but even then I think Cutter is probably better because it does have more pressure. So I'm really down on Questing Druid right now, because I think right now Rug Druid is trying to do the slow grindy tempo approach that blue-black tempo just does better. So yeah, I think it's doesn't have enough pressure, and then you just take over as blue-black with your superior late game. And also here, Delver of Secret Icons, I mean Cutter less Delver builds, so either blue-black Delver without Tamio, and maybe they probably also don't play Kaito, so those are usually like an anti-combo decks with like aiming to do to curve like Delver and Swordseize into Bowmaster or something, killing the opponent quickly. But I think this doesn't really, again, it's not quick enough without Bolt, without Katar. So I think your really favorite here is the Tamio deck. But I think Cutter really did a lot to make it more playable. So many people don't play blue-red tempo right now because they feel it is a really bad matchup against blue-black tempo, but I don't feel it is favored. So I would say it's slightly favored or even because like double Cutter is really strong, and even if you have a Barrow Golf, I often get hit for like 20 damage in one turn. And yeah, if you have a couple of Hydros, maybe you can prevent it. So I think I'm putting it on the right edge of slightly favored here. I don't have much experience with Ninja, so I would assume it's maybe quite snowbally. So, and you can block most of the stuff, like if they have a like turn 1 Swordseize, your push play, I don't know, Ornithopter into turn 2 Yuriko, and then Kaito is really hard to handle, so I would assume that's really strong. But yeah, please write what you think about ninjas. I haven't really seen it in action much. And also Katara, I think it's also quite snowbally, so if they get early Katara going or Tamio, then you are in trouble, but if you can stop it, then you are probably ahead. So yeah, not sure. I'm putting both as even right now. And I think this is all of the tempo decks. Then there are the tribal decks where you are usually unfavored. So goblins. I don't Merfolk. No one plays Merfolk right now, but you could do it. I mean, the problem is, I think if you have toxic, like a couple of toxic deluges in the board, and then stabilize with a Barrogoyf, I think then those should be much better. So I think I will put them in slightly unfair, depends on sideboard, because specifically Barrogoyf is just so strong at stabilizing after a board wipe. So if you don't have Toxic Deluge, I would say unfavored, but if you have like 2-3 Barrogoyfs, like if you have another Goyf less variation with 2 mainboard Barrogoyfs and maybe one more on the sideboard, or even another Goyf, it's also quite strong if you can wipe the board and then they have a couple dudes without synergy, but still slightly unfavored. So if they have either while, they can play around your stuff like your Days Wasteland quite well. Then there is Eldrazi. This is unfavored. Like even if you have a couple of consigned to memories, or even I think even with 4 consigned to memory, I think it's still unfavored. They have the Chalice of the Void and a lot of beater power, and they have Cavern of Souls to make everything uncounterable. Then they have cast triggers. They have the Eldrazi that bounces your Murktide, and the red one that can take your Murktide over, Flash Raker, and so on. In the Echo Cup, Schmeckles has won 2 Echo Cups in a row, going 15-1 in matches, just because. Sorry, I got a telephone call. Where was I? Yeah, Schmeckles went 15-1 in matches in the 2 Echo Cups, and Echo Cup meta is very fair blue heavy. So if you want to beat up on blue-black tempo, I think Eldrazi is an excellent choice here. Then what more aggro decks? We have mono black aggro. I think this is slightly unfavored because, like, I guess they have they can Dark Ritual into a Barrogoyf. They have Doughty Voidwalkers. They just have more creatures, and I think structurally they are a bit ahead because they're also very hard to wasteland. So Days also doesn't do that much against them. But I think it's also possible if you can like handle their first few threats and get a card advantage engine going like Tamio or Kaito, then you can also stabilize. So I think it's only slightly unfavored. Pox is unfavored in both versions, the Lone Pox and the classical Pox. Lance is unfavored, especially after Harbinger was rules changed, which I'm still annoyed against. So I think Cradle Control used to be, depends on sideboard, so with a couple of Toxic Deluges, I think it was beatable. But now I'm not even sure because with the Badger Mole Cup, they have those explosive starts, and it used to be that you have like one turn where you could kill their creatures. Like if they ever untap with their White of Reliquary, they would almost always win because they can tutor lands and like make their stuff phase out. But now with the Badger Mole Cup, I think even with double toxic, I'm not even sure if this is then still even. Please write what you think. I'm going to put it in unfavorable right now. Dark Depths, I'm not sure. I'm going to put it in unfavored, like the fast. I'm also not really well versed in the land and depths variations, but I think it's also unfavored, but I'm not quite super sure. Then Initiative, I think they can always have super quick starts, right? But especially if you have Nether Golf, it's quite possible that you can take back the Initiative. You have Consigned to Memory. I think this is slightly favored, especially if you have Nether Golfs. If you don't have Nether Golfs, I think it could be very difficult. But I mean, you have Force and Days, Force of Negation, and so on. So I think slightly favored. Let's put it here. Back mid-range is slightly unfavored. For example, if they have the carpet of flowers in the sideboard, and Leovold is just super annoying. But also, I think it could be beatable sometimes, because as long as you have Tamio or Kaito, you also can get a snowball going. So let's put it at slightly unfavored. Moonstompy, I would say it's kind of even to slightly favored. Like if you have like 4 consigned to memory and 2 Hydroblast, then I would say it's slightly favored, depends on sideboard. So with the default configuration, it's maybe kind of even. The One Ring is really strong. Maybe it's slightly favored in general. I personally am not always so lucky against the deck, but I think we have the potential. Like if we have the couple of Hydros in the sideboard, or we could even play 3 Hydros. If this deck is sometimes at some point really, really strong, I guess we could make it better than even in theory by going to like 3 Hydros and 4 Consigns or something like this. Nilrod sometimes is good, sometimes it isn't, depending on if they play a lot of stuff like the One Ring. But yeah, I think it should be slightly favored in theory. Even though it doesn't feel that way for me, because I have like 60% win rate in general, and I have less than that against this deck, but I definitely probably have more than 50, slightly more maybe. So let's put it here, I guess. Then Mardu Energy, or like Boros Energy, or like Boros Aggro or Mardu Aggro, however you want to call it. It's unfavored, but I think if you play 2 Toxic Deluges in the sideboard, I think you can make it more like even. So let's put it here. I'm not even sure if the 2 Toxic Deluges help to make the Death and Taxes deck more towards slightly unfavored, because like they have so much flicker stuff, and maybe if they have Overlord of the Bale Merc, which doesn't get hit by Toxic Deluge. But yeah, maybe I'm going to put it as the best of the slightly unfavored one. Please write to me what you think. I think with 2 Toxic, maybe it's only slightly unfavored, but I'm not sure. Then Painter, probably even. I'm not sure. I mean, they're really good against the blue spells, but the black spells are quite good against them. So Barrowgolf, if you get it going, can be nice. You don't really die that often to the combo, so I think it's a bit similar to Red Stompy, where the Consigns and the Hydroblasts together are really important. I'm sure maybe, but is Red Stompy easier to beat? I mean, they can also be really grindy with the Fable and the Goblin, like artifact switch. So this is probably really close. I'm not sure. Even to... No, it's more like even. Maybe I put it here. I'm not sure. Then we have Maverick. So this, I would say, slightly... So this is unfavored, but I think with the 2 Toxic Deluges, we can make it more towards even. And Stifle Nord, I would say it's probably slightly unfavored. So I think this deck was really bad at the start, but since I think Modern Horizons 2, where they got like the 7 mana one, where they can draw 2 cards, I think it's more now like a control deck which can grind you out. So I think it's slightly unfavored, but at least like Consigned to Memory is not bad against it, and they also have cantrips, so Bowmaster, Kaito. Sometimes you can take over, so I think it's only like slightly unfavored. All right, so this is what I think about the matchup. Did I miss anything important? I probably forgot something. Maybe you differ what you think, but yeah, this is my like general idea of all the matchups. So if you want a deck that can really beat blue-black tempo and you want to play control deck, I think you have lots of options. I'm just not sure about Beanstalk if you want to play a tempo deck against. I think there's no tempo deck that has the edge against it in the tempo mirrors. Maybe with a if you go more towards bug, but then it's more mid-range, right? You could also play bug tempo, but I don't really like that. Then for like aggro, so Eldrazi is really strong. Where do I have the affinity deck? Pox is good, Lance is really strong. All the ramp decks are also really, really good. I think I put affinity here because you can maybe take against it. All right, so let me know what you think and see you later.